I think there's a lot more pressure on Arsenal to win the league and to win that game than there is on Manchester City.
Why is there pressure on Arsenal to win the league? I think Arsenal have been incredible this season. They've surpassed expectations. They've performed with a consistency level that's just way beyond what anybody thought they were capable of. And I think over the course of the season, they've earned the trust of their fans. And I think that by now they should have earned the trust of the media, of rival fans. And I don't really feel like they're getting the respect necessarily they deserve. So I think as an Arsenal fan, you've got to be confident. You've got to believe that they can go on and finish the job. The mood around the place is unbelievable. The manager has got everybody singing from the same hymn sheet. And the atmosphere at Emirates Stadium this year is something that I've never experienced. And I've been going there since it opened. So I think Arsenal are in a really, really solid position.
The thing we've sort of discussed in this is that Arsenal have been absolutely exceptional. They deserve massive, massive amounts of respect. But it is in Manchester City's hands. They've won 4 out of the last 5 Premier League titles. They've hit form at the absolute perfect time. And I think it's safe to say, and it's fair to say, that the Arsenal players and Arteta potentially are overachieving from what was maybe conceived of what could have been expected from them. And I think earlier on in the season, particularly before the World Cup and the few weeks after, I think it's fair to say that maybe Manchester City players were underachieving. I think that's not the case now. I think Guardiola was tinkering a little bit and he's found his formula, he's found his back four now. He's found this new technique of putting John Stones into the midfield. And it's absolutely irresistible. I mean, you think about the Liverpool game, the Southampton also 4-1, and then Bayern Munich blew them away. I think Arsenal deserve respect. They've put in unbelievable performances. They performed way better than you or I thought they would have. But Manchester City have 16 games in total now, 15 I think it is. And if they win them all, they'll win the treble. And you really wouldn't put it past them. They are that kind of team, that irresistible, immovable object.
Manchester City have been great and are great and have been great for years. And so I understand why people are looking at them and thinking, you know, it's in their hands, they're going to go on and win it. And you're correct to say it's in their hands, but it's also in Arsenal's hands as well. And I don't really understand why that bit is being missed when people are talking about this title race. If Arsenal continue in the way they're going and go to the Etihad and even get a draw, then Arsenal are in the driving seat still. Arsenal have, as we record this, a 6-point lead. Okay, City have played a game less, but they still have a 3-point cushion over Manchester City. So yes, it's in City's hands in that they play Arsenal at the Etihad and they've got the opportunity to close that gap. But it's also in Arsenal's as well, and I feel like that part's being overlooked.
I think it's not a disrespect to Arsenal that part is being overlooked. And I think in any ordinary title race, if let's say this was against a Liverpool side or a Chelsea side, that would be at the forefront of the conversation. It's because of who Man City have been over the last 5 years, who Pep Guardiola is, and that relentless winning mentality that they have. I know a lot of people will clap back at Manchester City, and Manchester City fans like myself, and say like, oh, does it not get a bit boring? It doesn't seem like there's that much soul or there's that much heart. It just seems like a kind of robotic winning machine. But to the same extent, the other flip side of the coin is that is what you're coming up against. You're not coming up against a normal side. You're coming up against a team who knows exactly what it means to be champions. You're coming up against a manager who has basically changed English football. And in the last, people were saying, oh, can he do it in the Premier League? Well, he's dominated the Premier League. He's completely owned it. And I think as well, your fixtures are harder than ours. We have more. Certainly, we're fighting on a couple more fronts than yourselves. But the fixtures that you've got, West Ham away, fighting for their lives, that's going to be a very difficult game. Newcastle away, fighting for a Champions League spot for the first time in however many years. And I think those kind of games, if you can come over those two, fantastic. And I think you deserve to be champions. And I think you deserve to be champions anyway, to be completely honest. I think you've been more consistent. I think your players have performed at a ridiculously high level for what their perceived quality was before. But I just think that with the fixtures that City have in the Premier League and the fact that they've been there before, I just think we might. Do you not
think we're getting caught up on what Manchester City were as opposed to what they are this season, where they have, as you say, been a little bit inconsistent in the Premier League? There's also this Champions League narrative that follows Manchester City around. They've got to win the Champions League, all of that investment, the top players in the world, the top manager in the world, and they can't win the European Cup. Well, they have to. So do you not think there will come a point where the pressure on Manchester City to win the Champions League could cause some kind of loss in focus maybe in the Premier League? Because if they don't do that, then regardless of whether they win the Premier League or not, people are going to look at Pep Guardiola and say, hang on a minute, you still haven't won the Champions League since the days when you had Lionel Messi. So I just wonder if that obsession that Manchester City have with the Champions League, the fact that they're in the FA Cup as well, which they should probably win, by the way, but the fact that they're in that as well, does it mean that their focus gets spread 3 different directions? And does that take away from the Premier League, where they've shown already this season that when they're not 100% focused and when they're not on it, they will drop points?
No, it's certainly a good point. And I think the only counter-argument that I would have to that is that, as I've said, there's 15 games left. Now, I think City's inconsistency this year has been hampered by the World Cup more than most. And not just because they had the most players in the Premier League going, but when City have won the league the 4 times out of the last 5 years, that period from about November to February has been the title winning period. We've seen like 16, 17, 18 game wins in a row. Obviously that was completely halted for the World Cup, and I think that is part of the reason why there was some form of inconsistency. I think that inconsistency is gone now. I think the Cancelo thing was a huge deal. I think getting rid of what Pep Guardiola described as an unhappy face kind of gave a lot of the other players a bit of a kick up the backside. Getting rid of him obviously kind of created a slightly better morale. And since then it has just been relentless winning. And I think Manchester City now are what they were. I appreciate the point of getting sidetracked by the Champions League, but look what happened Wednesday. 3-0 against Bayern Munich. Going into that second leg, it takes off a huge amount of pressure. If we can do that again in the semi-final, then these games actually become more simple than they may seem on paper.
I agree with that. I think that if obviously it's the dream scenario to get a 3-0 win in the first leg against a side like Bayern. I don't think you're going to get that against Real Madrid if they're your opponents in the next round. So I think that tie mentally will take a lot out of Manchester City as well as physically. We know they've got a squad. We know they can rotate. We know that they can change it up for the FA Cup. So it's not really about physical tiredness for me. It's about the mental side of it and the focus being elsewhere. But just going back to that point about the World Cup, I totally take it on board. You lost a lot of players. But nobody's speaking about the fact that Arsenal lost their centre forward, for whom they paid £50 million in the summer, and he's only just returned to fitness. All that time, Arsenal have been going at it with arguably one of their top 3 players not available, and they've had to plug in the likes of Eddie Nketiah, who no one gave a hope to. Does that not show how good the rest of the team is as a collective? Does that not show how good a coach Mikel Arteta is and how strong and resilient this team are mentally? I mean, the game at Anfield last weekend, you could argue that Arsenal was slightly fortunate not to get beat in the end. Yeah. But that could be a massive point come the end of the campaign. So I think every time this season Arsenal have come up against a big test, they've managed to pass it. And when they have faltered on occasion, they've managed to bounce back pretty quickly. Yeah. And so for me, this thing of City have been there and done it is great and it's valid. I totally accept that. But to almost write off, and I'm not saying you personally are doing that, but for people to write off Arsenal's ability to get over the line now feels disrespectful given what they've shown this season. Really,
it comes down to the 26th of April. It comes down to you coming to the Etihad. And I think no matter how amazing you've been this season, which you have been, and no matter how much character you've shown, they are the kind of games, well, that is the game that will decide the title. Realistically, that's the game that will decide the title. And I just think player for player, manager for manager, Manchester City at home, I think you just have to favour City. And if that's the game that's going to win you the title and City are favourites for that game, I think it kind of leads on to City being favourites for the title.
But there's a massive pressure on City to win the Premier League title, I think, and there isn't on Arsenal. I think if Arsenal went on and won it, it would be talked about as a massive achievement. But if they missed out by a point or two, nobody's going to turn around and say that was a failure of a season. So I think there is pressure on City, and City would probably have to win that game as opposed to Arsenal, who could come there, get away with a point and would react as if it was a win because that's how significant it could be. So I think there's so much still to come between now and that game. There's a couple of games for Arsenal in the Premier League. I think City have only got one more game before that, which is against Leicester City, which I expect them to win. Yeah. But I think psychologically, Arsenal could open up a bigger lead because of the fact they'll be ahead in games. Yeah. And maybe that just increases the pressure that little bit more on Manchester City.
I actually really disagree about the pressure point. I think there's a lot more pressure on Arsenal to win the league and to win that game than there is on Manchester City.
Why is there pressure on Arsenal to win the league over Manchester City, who have won it 4 out of the last 5 seasons?
That's why.
Who have an incredible squad, who, when you look at that project and you look at what they've done, anything other than winning the league is a failure. They've got a striker that he scored 45 goals this season. Surely there's pressure on City to go on and deliver.
But that's why, though, if City don't win this, if City don't win the Premier League this year, then they've won 4 out of the last 6. Still an absolutely incredible record. You'd expect them to be there and thereabouts again next season. The crushing blow of Arsenal getting that close and then not being able to replicate it, and then let's say Manchester City go out, buy 3 midfielders, buy Jude Bellingham and completely wipe the floor with the league next year, that's very, very difficult to recover from. I'm not saying that there should be pressure externally. I think other fans should appreciate the fact that whatever Arsenal do this season, it's been an absolutely enormous success. But I think for Arteta, the players and the club, I think winning the Premier League now when you've come so close is incredibly important. And I think if City don't win the Premier League, like you say, they might win the Champions League. They're probably favourites to win the FA Cup. It will still be a somewhat successful season in terms of trophies. Whereas if Arsenal go away from the end of the season completely trophyless, that could have a huge knock-on effect of both the players' mentality, the mentality of the club, the board. Do you not think?
I think it depends on the players and it depends on the manager. And I think that what Arsenal have proven this season is that they had a major disappointment at the end of last season, missing out on the Champions League, and they've come back stronger.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these players, when you look at their age profiles, 21, 22, 23, they'll be looking at it and going, okay, we got close, let's go again.
Yeah.
And with more reinforcements, with the inclusion of Champions League football, which we haven't had for a number of years now, to be able to go and bolster that squad further. I think the most exciting thing about Arsenal's project right now is that it hasn't even blossomed yet. Yeah. It's still at the very beginning. And so I disagree that there's a lot of pressure on Arsenal to win the league this season. I think at the time, if Arsenal miss out, it will feel like the end of the world.
Yeah.
People will be downbeat about it. But when the dust settles, I think people will look back and go, running Manchester City as close as they did would be way beyond what anybody expected. And now they're back in the Champions League, and now they can push on with a young core, young group. I mean, how long is Pep Guardiola going to stay at Manchester City and have that same hunger to win the Premier League the way he's been doing it over? It's great. It's an unbelievable achievement. But you got to feel like if he wins it again, and if he wins the Champions League as well, that maybe that cycle's coming towards its end. Yeah. So I believe that Arsenal will do enough, and I believe they'll get over the line. I believe that they'll go to the Etihad and they'll get the point that they need probably to get out of there and sort of then hopefully push towards the title. But that's my prediction. I just think that Arsenal have proven to me, and should have proven to most people by now, that they're made of much tougher stuff than people give them credit for.
And I think you're right. I think Arsenal have not been given anywhere near the credit they deserve. And as you say, I've looked at the fixtures of Arsenal playing and I've thought, oh, here's where we're going to gain, here's where we're going to gain. And we haven't. Scored so many last-minute winners, put in some absolutely fantastic performances, and surprised pretty much everyone. At the beginning of the season, I don't think anyone would have thought that you were in the position that you are now. But the situation is that Manchester City are now clicking, they are in form. The team are playing incredible football. Pep Guardiola's found a rhythm and he's found a routine that is just working. We've just blown away Bayern Munich 3-0. No one could have predicted that happening, no matter how good or how highly you rate Manchester City. And it comes down to that game on the 26th. And I think Manchester City, just like as what happened at the Emirates with the 3-1, I think City are just going to edge Arsenal. And I think once that happens, they're not going to slip. How many times have City won the league on the last day of the season? I think it's been 4 times. They've shown that they've been there before. They've got that experience. And I think that's just going to tip them over the line.